So Brother Dave has been practicing mindfulness for over 20 years now. He's a former sergeant in the United States Marine Corps and a former Buddhist monk in the tradition of Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. Seems to have a penchant for shaving his head and wearing a uniform. Perhaps it's his love of service. After spending 6 years in Buddhist monasteries and practice centers, he now resides in San Diego and travels the world teaching mindfulness. Dave is a certified teacher of the Search Inside Yourself program, a course in mindfulness, neuroscience, and emotional intelligence designed at Google for the corporate setting. He has experience teaching mindfulness to a wide variety of populations, including business leaders, teachers, yoga instructors, social workers, cancer patients, and their families, teens, and military veterans. He has helped facilitate programs from New York City to Anchorage, Alaska, and everywhere in between. As an ordained member of the late Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh's Order of Interbeing, Brother Dave believes that all of us can use the tools of mindfulness to live fuller, happier lives right now. He likes to say that he spent all those years training in monasteries so you don't have to. And so I'd like to bow out and invite Brother Dave for us. Thank you so much for being here, Brother Dave.
Thank you, Zach. Hi, everybody. Joyful Mountain Sangha. I love it. Thanks so much for having me here. It's been really beautiful to be with you this morning. Just be taken into my own practice with the support of your Sangha. I'm grateful. Thanks for that bit of introduction, Zach. Well, that's kind of all you need to know. Yeah, I'm a crazy kid from the Bronx, first generation American. Mom's from Ecuador, my dad's from Ireland. And sort of to escape the insanity of the Bronx in the 70s and 80s, which is where I grew up, I went into the Marine Corps, which was sort of like jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. And then I got really into yoga. When I got out of the military, yoga just made me feel good. And I was so used to being so in my body and training in a kind of an intense, physically intense and concentration intense way every day. And yoga gave me that again. It took me a few years before I was a young man in my 20s, before I realized it was a spiritual practice. For the first few years, I think I was just exercising, But at a certain point, a teacher tapped me on the shoulder and pulled me to the side after a yoga class. This was really just a group of friends being led by a yogi out in the desert, but it was a class nonetheless. She was our teacher. And she looked at me and she was like, "Dave, are you just exercising?" And I said, "Yes." It's very calming, but isn't that what we're doing, And she sat me down and she was like, no, Dave, like yoga is a 5,000-year-old meditation. It's designed to produce suffering in a safe space, like the difficulty of standing on one foot, so that instead of going into our habit and running away from the suffering, that we can train ourselves to face it. We come look directly at it over and over again, breath after breath. And I was ready to hear that. I was looking for a way to train with my suffering. I was in a lot of it. As a young adult, I was dealing with the trauma of my upbringing. I was dealing with the trauma of having been in the military. I had a lot of pain. I felt like a pot that had too much in it. I was worried I was going to break. Yeah, it was a very strong time in my life. Mm. So then I dove into that world and I became a yoga teacher and a yoga therapist, and ended up running a clinic for the American Cancer Society, teaching yoga teachers how to work with people at end of life and people that were going through cancer treatment. And somewhere along the line, I found Ty. Or better to say, he found me, right? My first mentor in massage actually was the first C to introduce me. He had a book on his altar by Ty, tiny little book. It's like 3 inches by 5 inches, you know, it's like a little postcard of a book, uh, called The Long Road Turns to Joy. It's a book about walking meditation. And it's very, very beautiful in that it's written in that poetic, kind of simple, concise style of Thai, and has lovely photographs. So I probably flipped through it 100 times, you know, as an apprentice to this massage master, because it was in the waiting room where we sat and waited for clients on his altar. So that was the first seed. There was just something about that book. It just made me feel good to read it, about Thai's words, and pictures of people in walking meditation in Plum Village. And then some years later, I was in a bookstore and I saw Thai's book, Anger, Wisdom for Cooling the Flames, on the shelf. And I was really angry in that moment. Yeah. And of course, I remembered Thai's name. Thich Nhat Hanh is not a name you see every day. And so I just bought it. I was like, ooh, that's for me. That is sitting on that shelf for me right now. And after that, I couldn't stop. After that, I couldn't stop. And so about 6 books in, you know, this was a long time ago, right? I didn't have a supercomputer in my pocket. But about 6 books in, I tracked down the phone number of the center in Vermont that was the East Coast Center at the time. And I called them. And I was like, hey, you know, I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not a meditator guy. I'm a yogi. But I can't stop reading your teacher's books. I just can't stop. Like, what should I do next? And I'm now buddies with the brother who answered the phone, Brother Emptiness, Dai Hup Kong. And he just started laughing. And he was like, hey, man, like we were, you know, sharing an order of curly fries. You know, he was so warm and familiar with me. And he was just like, hey, man, you know, just come on up here. My only advice is you don't come for less than a week. Like, it takes that long, like, to get a taste of like what we're really doing here. And so I did. You know, a few months later, I went up there, and I've been practicing ever since. Hmm. And so I look back on all that madness, you know, and I ask myself, like, what's the thread? Like, what connects all of that? What's the hand at the small of my back that's really driving my life? Which is synonymous with asking, like, well, what do I really care about? Not here, you know, not in my head, but in my heart. Like, what does my heart want? So that's why I wanted to talk today about service and how service is a path of practice. Because I think that's what connects it all. Even as a, you know, jarhead in the Marine Corps, you know, you're in the service, like you're there. Now, one of the ways I've said it is that I'm not proud of the fact that we still live in a world where it makes sense to have dogs at the gates. But I am a little proud that I was one. You know, that's not an easy thing to be. And so, yeah, I think it started there. I think there was some part of me. I think there's some part of us that understands that our happiness is connected to service. Ty would say happiness is not an individual matter. And I think that's in part what he's saying. This is not a solo trip. And to experience it in its full expression, to really enjoy life, we have to be very connected to other people and to nature and to animals, very connected in general. And once you get connected to other people, you kind of can't but end up serving them. If you love people, whether that's, maximal love, like the depth to which I care about my mother's health, or, a less intense version of that love. The way I care about all living beings, it doesn't really matter. I think you end up looking around like, how can I help? Just the way, like, when the party's ending, you just want to tidy up a little bit before you leave. You want to do a dish, I think that's hardwired in us. I think that's part of what we are. The psychologist Dr. Martin Seligman made a career out of studying happiness. And after decades of research and talking with thousands of people about what makes them happy and why, he came to the following conclusion: that in his, painting with very broad strokes, in his decades of experience studying this, he found that there were 3 approaches generally that people were using to try to produce happiness for themselves, to try to produce happiness in their lives. The first was a focus on pleasure, like sensual pleasure, the pleasure of eating, the pleasure of sleeping, the hedonist's approach. That one's been around for a long time. People have been experimenting with that method, for orienting their lives for a long time. So that's number 1, pleasure seekers. And then his second category was people who were focused on accomplishment, right? On achievement, like the doers, the check boxers, the people with 5 languages and 4 degrees who've lived in 12 countries, the type A's, the type A's. And obviously, right, our culture is largely built around that bucket. Right? Our culture is run by those people, in a lot of ways, for good and for bad, And then his third and final category, he called the people that had lashed their happiness, had connected their happiness to their sense of purpose, to their sense of meaning. And he was very clear, right? He is very clear that in his long studied experience with thousands and thousands of human beings, those people are the happiest. And not just the happiest when things are going well. His research has shown that those people are the happiest when they're in chronic pain. Those people are in the happiest when a family member dies. Those people are the happiest when times are tough. Those people have the strongest version, the most resilient version of happiness. And in my own experience, I agree. In my little experiment of 1 here, I agree. Ty likes to say, our teacher, the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, when he defines happiness, he'll sometimes describe it as a coin with 2 sides. And on one side of the coin is joy, excitement, pleasure. And on the other side of the coin is pain. Right? Suffering. And happiness is that coin together in balance. No mud, no lotus. Another way of saying the same teaching. And so the problem with the first two methods, with the pleasure seeking or the thing doing, the accomplishments making, the achieving, is that because I've tried those techniques. Not to say that I've been lashed entirely to me. I'm not Mother Teresa, like I've tried really, trying to just enjoy this and to maximize on pleasure. And I also do take a lot of pleasure from accomplishment. Like, I've done a lot of things, and I'm still doing them. I'm not a guy to sit and watch a lot of TV. I like to stay busy. I take a lot of pleasure in that. That makes me feel good. But the problem with those two paths, as I see it, is that they ultimately lead to an unhealthy duality. Right? Like, to use the example of pleasure seeking, like eventually, right, if you really connect your identity to build your identity around pleasure seeking, for example, and what you're doing is you're building an identity that's averse to the opposite of pleasure, right? That's averse to pain. And so then when pain comes, because it will, you're standing on one foot, because you've been training to make pain a really bad thing. But you are, as the 5 remembrances remind me every day, I'm of a nature to grow old. I'm of a nature to get sick. I'm a nature to die. The pain is coming. The pain is inevitable. It's inevitable. So the first 2 methods in Seligman's model create a duality that ultimately makes us less resilient, that ultimately puts us in a position of weakness. But on the other hand, if you focus on meaning, right? If you focus on meaning, you're going the other way. You're moving away from duality into exclusion as success, right? Into balance as success, right? And a healthy, inclusive balance. I don't want to be in rejection of anything. This is it. I don't know, what's the point in doing that? I don't get to make those things go away. I don't get to choose moment to moment how I feel emotionally. I don't get to choose moment to moment exactly what I'm thinking. I for sure don't get to choose moment to moment how my body feels. I can steer all of those things in certain directions. Eating healthy organic food, getting 8 hours of sleep, moving my body 20, 30 minutes a day. I can do things like that will steer the course of how my body feels. I have some control. All of those things are also steering my mood, right? And making me less susceptible to depression and anxiety. I have that control. We have that control. But moment to moment, our hearts are raw and vulnerable to the world. The phone can ring, and what is said on the other side can touch any and every emotion in me. A moment from now, I can be down on my hands and knees, crying like a baby, or laughing with tears streaming down my face. Well, that's available to us at all times. This roller coaster is that wild. It's that wild. Being a human being is so intense. It's so intense. Love it. I'm so grateful. Yeah, but it's not for the faint of heart. My goodness. Jesus. That's why my coffee cup says kindness on it. And I drink 2 cups of kindness every day. I need it. We need it. This is hard. delicious. So, right, it may sound like I haven't really said anything yet about how to serve. And the talk's almost over. And I'm aware of this. But really what I wanted to talk about today is this balance, right? Because, once you get a taste of how good it is to serve, and how soul nourishing it feels to help someone, you can become a bit out of balance with it, right? Because you can want to just do it more and more and more. I think parents experience this a lot because their child has endless immediate needs, and they can just dump 100% of their energy into serving the child, and the next thing you know, they're sick, they're injured, they're exhausted, they're arguing, because they haven't slept. It's very hard to strike the balance in the pressure cooker of having a new baby, for example. I know this as Uncle Dave. I don't have kids, but man, I'm uncle to a lot of little ones. I've bounced a lot of little lunatics on my knee. I love them, the tiny humans. They remind me of what I am, because just as they're just cycling through every emotion in an hour, so am I inside. I'm just wearing this, society mask. And inside I want to scream when the macaroni and cheese in my bowl is finished. I always want one more spoonful. It's part of this. That's what this is. That's being a human being. So what I wanted to say today about service is I wanted to give you this practice. I call it 80-20 practice. And what I've observed in myself and in other people, particularly people that have a bent for service, right? People that have tasted the fruit of service and how sweet it is, how healing. What I see is that they're taking 80% of their attention, of their awareness, life energy, animus, all synonyms. They're taking 80% of it and projecting it outward. Right? Like, oh, let me help. And then that 20% that's left, that is actually them paying attention to themselves, they think is enough. Right? And I would argue that we need to completely reverse those proportions. Not in a narcissistic or selfish sense, quite the contrary, in order to make us more powerful, more capable to serve. I would like to posit that right now I am my healthiest, happiest, meaning balanced, right? Joy and suffering balanced. My happiest self, if I'm paying 80% of my attention to me. Because if I'm not doing that, if I'm not aware of the feeling of my feet on the ground, if I'm not aware of the rate of my breathing, little accelerated, right? Because I'm in a public speaking moment. If I'm not aware of the sounds in the room, time, if I'm not aware of all of my needs right now, am I hungry, angry, lonely, tired, halt? If I let that go, then my ability to actually show up, to be here with you, it's greatly diminished. But if I am aware of all of those things, if I'm taking really good care of Dave by paying attention to him and his needs, where his body is in space, then that 20% that I am projecting outward, with which I'm interacting, with which I'm serving, it becomes very powerful. It's the difference between standing on one foot and standing on two. Right? If you have your own practice of self-loving awareness, I like to define mindfulness very simply as paying attention with love. Paying attention with love. Love in a Buddhist sense, meaning the four immeasurables, the four infinite abodes that define love in our practice: joy, kindness, compassion, and inclusivity. So if I'm paying attention with those qualities infinitely to myself, oh, I feel so good. It makes me feel so good. Right? It makes me way less likely to rage or panic or withdraw in depression. It keeps me clear. It keeps me clear. And so very counterintuitively, perhaps, my practice for you, those who serve and aspire to serve, is 80 in, 20 out. 80 in, 20 out. Just try it. If you're there like, I can't do that, my phone is ringing all day. I have, 4 angry people standing at my desk. I get it. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's very simple. It's very simple. 80 in, 20 out. Just try it. Try it for 1 week. Try it for 1 week. Tie a string around your wrist that reminds you of 80-20 and wear it for 1 week. And I promise you, you'll have a moment where you will realize, like, wow, I would normally be yelling right now or running away or so sad or so confused. And instead, I'm paying attention to that. And I have so much more balance. And I have so much more space. And the last thing I'll say is, because I want to open it up to questions from all of you, I want to share this teaching I got some years ago now, about 5 years ago. I'm still sitting with it. It's from the teacher Joanna Macy. If you're not familiar with Joanna's work, she's a Dharma teacher in our tradition, in the Plum Village tradition. But she's also like, she's a wild woman. She's done everything from being in the CIA at one point in her life to she went to Russia and helped the villages that had been irradiated by Chernobyl, like, heal as communities. She's an incredible human being. And I've been studying her for a long time, Joanna Macy. And some years ago, I landed at Spirit Rock. It's a center in Northern California run by Jack Kornfield, Mindfulness Education and Practice Center. And Joanna Macy had just been there. So her event was like right before the event I was going there in support of. And the manager of the place saw me, and she, knowing that I was a student of Thai's and that Joanna was as well, she stopped me, because I'm like setting up for our event. And she said, "Hey, Dave, Joanna Macy was just here. Like, do you want a piece of the teachings?" Then she left us, and I just like stopped everything I was doing, emptied my hands, just calmed myself and came home to my body. When I said, "Yes, please, I would love to hear anything you'd like to share. Joanna's my teacher." And the woman said this. This was about 5 years ago. She said, "Joanna said that the time for individual heroes is behind us. That it's time now for us to link arms and to start walking to the future that we desire together. And if you don't know what direction to go, if you're feeling kind of lost or unsure of what to do, how to help, how to serve, then just look around until you see somebody who looks like they know what they're doing and link arms with them and just help them." And yeah, that was 5 years ago. And I've been sitting with that. It continues to inspire me. Thank you, Sangha. Hmm.